There's a figure in Iranian mythology called Zahak. Zahak is a later Persian, Middle Persian corruption of Ajidahaka. Ajidahaka or Ejdaha means the dragon. And this was a figure who in ancient Iranian mythology overthrows the king of the world, who ruled the world from an island continent at the center of the world, which froze over in a great apocalypse. And I've always argued that this is Antarctica, which is also Atlantis.
Mm-hmm.
So this king, Jamshid was Shah Jahan. He was the king of the world. And it said that when the apocalypse happened, Jamshid built vars on deep underground enclosures, like subterranean cities, for his people to survive the apocalypse. So this guy, the dragon, Ajidahaka, Zahak, defeats Jamshid. And he takes 3 of his daughters prisoner. And there's this one daughter, Shahrnaz. There are 3 daughters. One of them is named Shahrnaz. And she lives with Zahak in the palace, right? And she's supposedly a prisoner who later, together with the other 2 daughters, is freed by a hero named Fereydun. And Fereydun marries this woman, and he has 3 sons by her. One of the 3 sons is Sarm, the patriarch of the Sarmatians. So the Sarmatians are named after this guy Sarm. And Sarm is the son of this Shahrnaz by Fereydun. Fereydun frees her supposedly from the clutches of Zahak, and he has this kid Sarm, and Sarm becomes the fountainhead for the Sarmatian. Now here, listen to this. So Zahak was a black magician, supposedly. From a Zoroastrian perspective, black magician. His snakes would feed on people's brains, and he had 2 chefs. And this is symbolic for saying that from a Zoroastrian perspective, Orthodox Zoroastrian perspective, he was corrupting people's mind. And that he had 2 chefs cooking the brains, right, for the snake, means that his message was diabolical. In the literal Greek sense of diabolane, his message was it was meant to create paradox, like Zen koans, to expand your mind through creating a dialectical tension. That's what ultimately the 2 snakes and the 2 chefs were. But the snakes also, interestingly, connect us back to the viper venom, the dragoness priestesses, Medea. Who is Medea? Medea is a Sarmatian royal sorceress. So if Sarm becomes the progenitor of the Sarmatian people, and then the Sarmatians are worshiping these dragoness priestesses, or rather the dragoness priestesses are the figures organizing their form of worship, their cult, right? And they are worshiping gorgons with these serpents in their hair. You think there might be any connection between Zahak with the 2 snakes coming out of his shoulders and the Sarmatian worship of gorgons and their dragoness priestesses? Of course. And this has been completely neglected in Iranian studies. As far as I'm aware, I'm the only person who's ever pointed this out. Because it's deeply controversial. What it suggests is that there was an earlier Iranian religion before Zoroastrianism, before the teachings of Zarathustra. It wasn't just a Mithraism that you can equate with the Roman form of Mithraism, this solar military cult that Mithraism was warped into in Rome. No, it was a darkly feminine form, which among other things included a worship of Mithra in feminine form. The Greeks themselves wrote in the time of Herodotus that the Iranians worship Mithra, and Mithra is their form of Aphrodite. They equated, so they knew what, any decent, Iranian study scholar should know, which is that if you trace Mithra back to the oldest sources as Mithra Varuna, this deity had a feminine aspect and a masculine aspect, was hermaphroditic or androgynous, and in many cases was worshipped in its feminine aspect, which is why to this day in Iran, only women are named Mithra. Mithra is a feminine name in Iran exclusively to this day. So you have Mehr as a masculine form of it, but Mithra, specifically the ancient name, is only given to women. So the reason why nobody has, I think, really gone down this road before me in Iranian studies is that it excavates a primordial, dark, feminine Iranian religion prior to Zoroastrianism, which is the original cult of the Iranian people, whose most important identifiable historical figure is Medea, the woman after whom the Median kingdom named itself, okay? And this is the original form of the religion of Mithra and Prometheus, who is Mithras.
It seems like what you're talking about with Mitra Varuna, the androgynous, sounds very similar to Zurvan and Zurvanism, which, given that was considered heretical in Zoroastrianism, perhaps the aversion to the idea of Mitra as androgynous could be tied into an aversion because of the Zurvanism aspect of it.
Here's the connection. Let me try to lay this out as succinctly as possible. So originally you have this form of Mithra that I've described being worshipped, right? Then you have Zarathustra come in as a philosopher, which is really what he is. He's the first philosopher, and he thinks abstractly. He's like the first of the pre-Socratics. Right. And he develops this abstract idea of Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. Originally, he calls it Angreminu, and it's contracted later in Middle Persian into Ahri. Ahura Mazda and Ahriman. These are two abstract principles. They later get turned into deities in a dualistic belief system. Okay? The Mithraists are not satisfied with this. And in the Parthian period, they create a new form of Mithraism that incorporates and accommodates Zarathustra's theology, Zarathustra's theosophy, right? So that there is still Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, but they introduced this Zorvan, who was actually there was a very ancient cult of Zorvan in Iran. You find evidence for it in Luristan, but these Parthian Mithraists brought back Zorvan in a myth where Ahura Mazda and Ahriman are twins born from out of this hermaphroditic Zorvan. And then Mithra is reframed as the mediator between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman, the kind of umpire who signs shakes on it between Ahura Mazda and Ahriman on the terms of their conflict through cosmic history. But this mediator, Mithra or Mehr in that Parthian Pahlavi language, is meant to ultimately reintegrate Ahura Mazda and Ahriman into the godhead of Zorvan. So Zorvan, what people call the Zorvanite heresy, whatever, it's kind of a corruption and a misunderstanding of a form of Mithraism where basically what's being expressed is the evolution of self-consciousness over history, where initially God, the deity, the Godhead, call it the Godhead. The Godhead is initially unconscious. And from out of the unconsciousness of the Godhead, Ahriman is actually born first. And the world is delivered over to Ahriman as the heir of Zorvan, the firstborn heir. And then Ahura Mazda is born second, the twin, the good twin. And it has to engage in a struggle with Ahriman, right? This struggle is mediated by Mithra and represents the increasing self-consciousness of the Godhead through the course of history, to the point where the Godhead becomes fully self-conscious and integrates its unconscious evil into it integrates its unconscious evil, its shadow, so the shadow of the God, right? And the whole mediator for this process is Mithra. So really, this is a sophisticated Parthian form of Mithraism that's bringing back this more holistic and integral, darker wisdom of Medea in a way that encompasses and incorporates Zoroastrian idea. And the fundamental conflict that took place in the Sassanid period of Iran, which actually ultimately shattered Iran and rendered it vulnerable to the Islamic conquest, was precisely the conflict between this new, more sophisticated form of Mithraism, which the Mazdakites were advocating, and Orthodox Zoroastrianism. That was the basic dialectical struggle of Sassanid Iran.
No, thank you. That's I had some of the overview, but thank you for filling in a lot of the details there. One of the aspects that I find so fascinating about Zoroaster is, to the best of my research, he was the first one to have like an actual revealed religion, as opposed to much more of a traditional, chthonic growing up from the people sort of thing. And the other thing I wanted to comment is your explanation of Zurvanism and the history there makes me wonder if there's any impact of Taoism, because I'm seeing a lot of, Ahura Mazda and Ahriman with the yin and yang, and Zurvan being the Tao, and then you have the ultimately the synthesis of the two and the resolution with Mithra. That's sort of a pattern that I was extracting from what you were saying.
Those two remarks are excellent opportunities for me to really briefly go back into 2 points that I've made, I think, in prior conversations we've had, especially based on my book, Iranian Leviathan. So what I'm about to say is really truncated. Anyone wants the details, devils in the details, read Iranian Leviathan. So in response to your first point, I would categorically reject the characterization of Zarathustra as the bringer of a revealed religion or a prophet in the Abrahamic sense. Zarathustra's Gathas is a philosophical text. It belongs together with the fragments of Heraclitus or with the writings of Parmenides or the poem of Empedocles. Pre-Socratic philosophy was expressed poetically. It involves critical thinking and the development of abstract ideas, but expressed poetically. And Zarathustra is the first in that series of pre-Socratic thinker. He wasn't the only Iranian, by the way. There was another Iranian pre-Socratic called Anacharsis of Scythia, who was much more of an anarchist than Zarathustra, and who is very similar in his thinking to Heraclitus, and who I think probably was an influence on Heraclitus and a bridge between Zarathustra and Heraclitus. Interesting thing about Anacharsis, the Scythian, is that the other person whose teachings are very similar to the lost writings of Anacharsis, which we have only in quotations, fragmentary quotations by other people, because thank you, Christians, for burning the Library of Alexandria. So the other interesting thing about Anacharsis is his teaching is very close to that of Gautama. And as I've argued in Iranian Leviathan, based on the research mainly done by Christopher Beckwith, his book Greek Buddha, Gautama Buddha is Lao Tzu. They're the same person. Lao Tzu, the author of the Tao Te Ching, is Gautama Buddha in his old age wandering in China. He was a Scythian, an Iranian. And the main purpose of Gautama Buddha's teaching was to critique the philosophy of Zarathustra. So in any case, the point is that we're dealing in these people, Gautama or Zarathustra, with philosophers. Zarathustra did not bring any religion, no religion. Okay, he is not a religious prophet. A religion that we call here Zoroastrianism, which in Iran they call it Behtin, the good religion, was created later based on, I think, a misappropriation of the teachings of Zarathustra. And considering how much there is in the Gathas about the mumbling priests who deceive people together with the plundering princes, as he puts it, I think Zarathustra himself will be appalled to have seen the message of the Gathas turned into this religion of the Sassanid period, this Orthodox Zoroastrian state religion. In the Achaemenid period, under first of all, Cyrus doesn't say anything about Zarathustra at all. So there's no way Cyrus the Great was a Zoroastrian. I argue in Iranian Leviathan, he was definitely a Mithraist. But then when you look at, Darius and Xerxes, who are putting in their inscriptions in the name of Ahura Mazda this and the name of Ahura Mazda that, right? And I've come to crush out, the liars and so on and so forth. They also invoke Mithra all. So they had some kind of a syncretic belief system that, represented an endurance of Mithraism combined with some ideas from Zarathustra. It was nothing like some Zoroastrian state religion. Zoroastrianism as a cult that compares itself to the Abrahamic religions and wants like a prophet who brought a revealed text where the Avesta is then framed as something like the Bible or the Quran. That's a creation of Ardashir Babakhan, the founder of the Sassanid dynasty, together with his, cobwebbed, mummified priesthood, the latter day so-called magi who are a disgrace to the magi. They're better to call them mobeds, which is the term they use for themselves anyway. And I think actually the order of the magi, the real order of the magi, which goes back to Medea, went to war against those people. And that's the occult history of Sassanid Iran, which sadly ended with the shattering of the country.
Join Patreon AB Prime or Red Circle and get the full episode and podcast summary and other cool bonuses. Clean episodes on a private RSS feed, exclusive stream shows early, and no more commercials. Support Eon Byte.